Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm Jon Macri, and joining me once again, PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. Nate, we're talking breakout fantasy quarterbacks today, QBs who are ready to, take their game to the next level in the NFL. We're getting super close to the start of the preseason at the same time. So how you feeling as we get into this very exciting time of year?
I'm feeling good. July is just flying by. We're already in the second half of July, less than 2 weeks away from the Hall of Fame game. So we are very close to the preseason already. So glad that we're getting into things. But like written content, I've probably already written 50 articles so far this month. So it's like just go, go, go. We got so much left to get ready for fantasy drafts, but it's going to be a fun next 2 months, little less than 2 months till the start of the season.
Yeah, there's still a lot to unpack before we get into week one, right? Like we're going to go over all the preseason games and things like that. But a lot of our content still breakout candidates and, the league winners and dark horse candidates, like all these kinds of things that we're still going to get into. So I'm excited. I love these kinds of topics. I love breakout candidates and quarterbacks. It's a fun position obviously to dive into, but it's also a smaller pool of players to choose from relative to the rest. So normally I try to leave out rookies like from my breakout list, but because we don't want to only focus on like 2 or 3 players, we're going to include some rookie quarterbacks in the mix here and discuss the potentially high expectations we have for them heading into year one, alongside some of the quarterbacks who were in the league last year and that we think are primed for a breakout, or at least to become significantly more fantasy relevant in 2024. The way I kind of framed it, like in my breakout articles, was that the player must see a significant jump in either fantasy finish or fantasy points per game. And not just a small improvement, just had to be like substantial enough that we really notice the difference week to week or by season's end. So, Nate, let's get going here. We have a decent mix of players to go over, from high ADP guys to middle rounders to late rounders. So let's start at the top with some admittedly low-hanging fruit here. Look, we could pad the stats a bit by taking an obvious choice. We don't have to leave this guy out just because he's an obvious choice being drafted as the QB5 on underdog ADP right now. It's Anthony Richardson of the Indianapolis Colts. So, Nate, I think it's safe to say that if Richardson played a full season last year, then, he'd probably not be eligible for this list in year two. But he didn't. He only played 4 games and not even a full 4 games at that. So what do you think the upside is here with A-Rich heading into a potential 2024 breakout season?
The clear and obvious thing is he runs the ball a lot, and any quarterback who runs the ball a lot is a great fantasy asset. We saw Justin Fields, who is now presumably a backup quarterback, be a pretty consistent top 10 fantasy quarterback whenever he was healthy. Even like going back to those couple of games where Taysom Hill was a starting quarterback for 4 straight weeks, he was a consistent top 10 fantasy quarterback there. So any quarterback who runs the ball a lot, regardless of how well they throw the ball, is going to be a fantasy starter. And Richardson definitely fits that category. He ran the ball 10 times in both of the games where he started and finished the game. He was still on pace for somewhere close to 10 carries in the 2 games where he only played partial games. So that rounds out to about 8 carries a game. And pretty much every quarterback who's had 8 carries per game these past couple of years have been fantasy starters. Last year was just Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, both top 4 quarterbacks. The one worst case scenario I could see for a quarterback who started the full season was Cam Newton a couple years ago, 2020. He finished as quarterback 16 with a similar-ish rushing total number, but I would expect Richardson to be more efficient at this stage of his career compared to Newton at that stage. When you look at him as a passer, he didn't grade out all that great in the small sample size we saw. So I think Fields is a pretty fair comparison of we should see some weeks where Richardson is a clear top 3 quarterback just because he has a huge game. Other weeks where it's not as good, and the Colts receivers are probably below average as a group. Pittman, Mitchell, and Downs, all promising young receivers, but almost every team has 3 young promising receivers. So you have to still compare the teams to each other. So ideally, we see Richardson improve as a passer and be a better passer than what we've seen out of Justin Fields, in which which case we're looking at someone who has the potential to be a top 3 quarterback, but the floor is really high. And the big thing is just, can he stay healthy? And he wasn't able to do that last year. Hopefully he's able to do it this year, but there are plenty of veteran quarterbacks that you can draft. Pick Richardson, pick a safer option so that if Richardson does get injured, then you have a big insurance policy, since there are plenty of decent quarterback options.
Yeah, for sure. And that was the thing with Richardson last year, right? Like we only got a taste of that fantasy potential. We didn't get to truly benefit from him from a fantasy perspective. So he has to stay healthy this year. And like you said, I mean, I'm with you. The same exact reasons for me. Like so much of his fantasy production across those 4 games came from him as a runner. 52.4% of his total fantasy points came from rushing production. That was the highest among all the quarterbacks last year. Now, again, small sample size, and I'm sure that would have evened out slightly more over time, but there's no denying, like, his calling card is going to be what he can do with his legs. Added the 4 rushing touchdowns as well. Like that helped his numbers quite a bit. So I think there's a good chance we see that kind of continue, because he took 57% of the goal to go carries when he was on the field last year. And you know, Jonathan Taylor will of course get some of those touches as well, but there's definitely an expectation that Richardson will continue to take carries near the goal line, not too dissimilar from Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia. And Hurts is probably the best comparison if we're looking at like past breakout fantasy quarterbacks for Richardson, because he too only really had like a small 4-game sample size prior to his true breakout year. And a lot of his upside obviously came from that, from his rushing ability, right? And then the other part of it with Hurts was that Shane Steichen, who was the offensive coordinator for Hurts in 2021 and 2022, is now the head coach of Richardson and has had success with a similar style quarterback in Jalen Hurts, and can hopefully translate that to Richardson as well. So yeah, main things obviously that we're looking for Richardson: maintain that rushing ability. We know he has it. We know he has the talent to do it. And we saw it as a rookie. We saw it in his college career as well. But yeah, maybe a nice bonus for him, like you said, it would be improvement as a passer. Of course, like he has it's an average receiving core right there to throw the ball to get some help. But you know, again, looking at Jalen Hurts for another comparison, and Anthony Richardson in those rookie years, Hurts also had a sub 60 passing grade from the year prior to breaking out, just like Anthony Richardson did. And again, a small sample, but that's another area where I think having Shane Steichen and that coaching staff involved might really help Richardson kind of improve there, because, you know, knowing how to treat a high rushing quarterback threat like this really makes a difference. And then, like I said, more than anything else, he has to stay healthy, right? He took some big hits last year that caused, you know, the shoulder surgery. You know, he needs to be able to avoid those big hits, be smarter about, you know, getting out of bounds or sliding. So hopefully he's learned that, and you know, we can all benefit from a fully healthy season with Richardson as, like you said, top 3, top 5 fantasy quarterback threat, if that's the case. So yeah, very optimistic. Obviously, you know, he's being drafted as a top 5, top 6 quarterback, depending on where you look. So people are very optimistic about him based on that small sample size from last year. But I think there's plenty of reason to be, and definitely worth kind of touching on here in this breakout episode.
Yeah, I do think it's okay to pump the brakes just a little bit on the Jalen Hurts comparison, just because Hurts, whenever the Eagles are at the 1-yard line, they're using Hurts as the ball carrier like over 90% of the times where they're running the ball, where what we saw last year was that 50-50 split, like you were saying, and that was before Jonathan Taylor was back with the team. So I don't know exactly how the split will be, and especially if they're trying to keep Richardson healthy, they might not give him as many 1-yard line touchdown carries as Hurts was getting, but still, we've seen plenty of other rushing quarterbacks who just run the ball a lot, don't necessarily score as many rushing touchdowns as Jalen Hurts gets, and they're still clear fantasy starters.
Yeah. Not even saying that we're going to get like a version of the tush push or anything like that for Anthony Richardson, because that's such a huge part of Jalen Hurts' game. But yeah, ranking relatively close to like those rushing opportunities and just overall too, right through the rest of the field as well, and just having that athleticism. Like he was a perfect 10 RAS score as well. Like he has this elite athleticism that we just don't get at the position. So there's just so much potential in what he can do when he is running the ball as well. So yeah, hopefully he stays healthy and we get to see that kind of come to fruition here in 2024. All right, let's move on to our next name, Nate. And this is where we do start to include some of the rookies. The number one overall pick from this offseason, it's Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears, being drafted as QB 13 on Underdog. What are your expectations on Williams heading into his rookie season?
I think there's a wide range of possibilities of what we could see for Williams this year, and that's typically true for like any first round pick. We talk about the first round quarterbacks months and months and months, and then once the season starts, it just all flips where everyone ends up being, and it becomes a bit unpredictable. So we think Williams has a great opportunity, and with landing with Chicago, having 3 wide receivers that you could consider wide receiver ones in general. So having that talent around him is going to be huge for him and very helpful. So we think he has a better odd than most rookie quarterbacks. And we also came into this season as him as a prospect being higher up than some other quarterbacks that we've seen taken first overall in other years. So I think he's a safer risk than a lot of other quarterbacks that are picked first overall, but luckily he is quarterback 13 because there are a number of other either established quarterbacks who have done really well or young quarterbacks who were in their first year as a starter last year and did well in their first year. So you don't have to have that kind of pressure in drafting Williams because you're not necessarily needing to draft him to be your starter. So I think he's kind of a great option of maybe you didn't get one of those top 5 quarterbacks, so you're taking a little bit more of a risk, but then you can draft Williams and see how they do, and ideally one of your 2 quarterbacks hits. So I think it's great that he's being drafted as a backup. And if you're drafting a backup quarterback, I don't think there's anyone really with more upside potential than him, since a lot of the other quarterbacks that are in that like 11 to 15 range, a lot of them are like the recent early first round picks. Tua's in there, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, other guys that like we've seen a little bit more what they can do, and potentially they can play better than we've ever seen before. But the further we get in all of their careers, the more likely it's going to be that they're not going to be a consistent top 5 fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, that's a good call. And I'm with you. Like I'm one of those people who's pretty optimistic about Caleb Williams as a rookie here. And you know, one of the things that I was looking at this offseason was kind of rookie quarterback performances, both like as a whole for fantasy and then kind of finding like the closest comps for our 2024 rookie quarterbacks to compare them with. And yeah, like generally rookie quarterbacks aren't necessarily amazing for fantasy. You know, looking at rookie quarterbacks who started at least 7 games since 2014, that led to 44 qualifiers. They averaged an overall finish of QB 25, 164.7 fantasy points, and then points per game they finished as like QB 32, 13.1 fantasy points. So obviously there are some duds included in there that bring down the group, but there's also some studs as well. And I think it's safer to assume that Caleb Williams, as that number 1 overall pick, like you said, and considering his college profile, is more likely going to be closer to that stud than dud category, I guess. So I started kind of looking at the rookie quarterbacks who actually did perform well in year 1: Deshaun Watson, Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud. And surprisingly, it was Deshaun Watson that kind of stood out to me as not a perfect comparable, but kind of close. Even if Watson like had 25 points per game in 7 games, like that was on the high end bar, but at least a similar situation with the team around him. So Watson had a top 5 wide receiver at the time to throw to in DeAndre Hopkins, as well as a great deep threat in Will Fuller with a productive receiving back in Lamar Miller. Caleb Williams doesn't necessarily have someone we'd qualify as like top 5 wide receiver heading into this year, but he does have 2 wide receivers who finished top 10 in PFF receiving grade last year with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, along with Rome Odunze, the 9th overall pick in this draft. And that he has that productive receiving back in DeAndre Swift now as well, right? And then the other part of it, Watson had a high 7.5% scramble rate as a rookie, delivered strong rushing production because of it. Williams and Watson relatively close in their career scramble rates coming out of college, which scramble rate in college does correlate strongly to scramble rate in the NFL as well. So Williams was at 6.2%, Watson at 7%. So not as high as Watson, but we know Williams has that scrambling ability, right? So looking kind of at those 2 things specifically, with an edge to Williams in passing, an edge to Watson in rushing, and then also not expecting 25 points per game necessarily, there's kind of, you could see the path right there for Williams to be like a top 10 fantasy quarterback, like you said, the upside and everything, if he can keep that up in the NFL as a rookie. So like you said, you don't have to take him as your QB1. Most times he's probably going to be your QB2, but I kind of like, if I had to take him as my QB1, I'd feel pretty good about it this year. And then obviously, you're probably packing on a safer QB2 to for insurance. But yeah, I really like the upside and the potential for Caleb Williams here in year one.
Yeah, you did mention the rushing, and he didn't run as much as other quarterbacks, but he did grade very well as a runner in college. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, kind of a tricky thing where like maybe he does start running the ball more in the NFL, in which case, like a lot of the quarterbacks we're talking about today are rushing quarterbacks. If he ends up in that category where he starts running the ball more often and he was good at running the ball, that could be huge for his fantasy potential.
Yeah, there's just so many paths you could see with Williams for him to find success for fantasy. Like he has all the passing weapons to succeed as a thrower of the ball and put up a ton of fantasy points that way. And then, like you said, he has the athleticism, he has the ability to run the ball if need be. He does scramble at a relatively high rate as well, so he can leave the pocket, potentially take off with it as well. So yeah, I feel pretty confident about him heading into year one here. Now we can't talk about Caleb Williams being a rookie breakout without also talking about a rookie quarterback who is now being drafted just ahead of Williams in ADP on Underdog. He's QB 11. It's Jayden Daniels of the Washington Commanders. Nate, this is a ranking that, for me personally, like I went back and forth on between Williams and Daniels, putting one over the other. Ultimately, it feels like Williams maybe is the safer pick of the two, but I think, as far as upside goes, Daniels is probably the favorite in that regard. So how are you feeling about Jayden Daniels here heading into year one?
Yeah, so the more that I was preparing for this, the more I started to question why the ADP gap is so big between Anthony Richardson and Jayden Daniels, because a lot of the reasons that we are excited about Richardson this year are the same reasons we're excited about Daniels. And Daniels was a great rusher in college. He had a 91.5 PFF rushing grade throughout his college career, which was the best of Power 5 quarterbacks in the past decade. Lamar Jackson, Richardson, Williams, three other quarterbacks that were in the top 5. Similarly, the best at avoiding tackles, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, both in the top 5 in that category as well over the past decade. So in terms of college rushing quarterbacks, he's been the best that we have seen in a long time. So he is capable of putting up huge rushing numbers. He has Cliff Kingsbury as his offensive coordinator, and he had Kingsbury had Kyler Murray when Murray was running the ball a lot in Arizona. Murray, a pretty consistent top 12 fantasy quarterback during that time, and had a pretty high peak as well. So, like, again, every quarterback you see that runs the ball a lot ends up doing well. So the main difference is we saw Richardson run the ball 10 times in 2 games, where we have not seen that out of Daniels in the NFL. But Daniels is potentially a better runner than Richardson, and I don't think the situation for the two quarterbacks is all that different. I think the receiving group's pretty similar to each other. One of the main differences, Richardson has Jonathan Taylor to hand the ball off to. Daniels' running backs, I don't think, are quite as strong, even though they are decent running backs, but every team has decent running backs. So I could very well see myself at least moving these two quarterbacks closer together in my rankings. Right now, their ADP gap is about 50-ish spots, depending on where you look, maybe 40-ish spots. But just for having Richardson have those couple of games that we've seen from him, but also have seen him get injured multiple times, I'm at least, when you're comparing where the quarterbacks are from their ADP, I'm probably most excited for Daniels out of the 3 quarterbacks we've talked about so far, when comparing how good I think they can be this year compared to where they're getting drafted.
Yeah, this is like you, another player that, as I continue to do more work this offseason and play with my rankings and stuff, like Jayden Daniels continues to be the player that I feel like very, very excited about, very, again, confident about, which, it's hard to say for a rookie quarterback, but like you said, all the numbers that he put up in college as far as his rushing ability point to him being like a very strong fantasy asset. And yeah, I wrote about Daniels in the rookie quarterback expectations article as well, and looking at the same things I did with Caleb Williams and finding the closest rookie season comp. And the one that felt most obvious to me was Kyler Murray, who had finished not only as a top 15 quarterback in his rookie year, which at the time when I wrote that article, that's where Daniels was being drafted, in that range, which was, I thought, a massive bargain at the time, depending on the platform. But he's still going in that range on some platforms, maybe not on Underdog as much. But again, just kind of coming back to like his Kyler comp. So Kyler Murray, a former first overall pick, Daniels was second overall in his class. And then the other similarities were that Murray had a year 14 Larry Fitzgerald, so not his prime, but still enough to command over 100 targets. He also had year 2 Christian Kirk and a strong receiving back in David Johnson. And then for Daniels, he has that reliable veteran in Terry McLaurin, who isn't in year 14, so probably a fair comp to that version of Fitz at the time. But he's also got a reliable tight end in Zach Ertz. He's got a former first rounder who we still kind of have to see what he is in Jahan Dotson, as well as, I guess, somewhat of a capable receiving back in Austin Eckler, if he can bounce back a bit this year as well. But Kyler Murray was a top 5 quarterback in his rookie year in rushing fantasy points. He scrambled at a top 15 rate and then finished the year as the overall QB7. So if we're looking at Daniels, there's an argument that his situation around him is slightly better than Murray at that time, depending on how you look at it. But knowing too that Daniels is absolutely going to run and take off, and he is an elite runner of the ball. Like you said, one of the best we've ever seen coming out of college football. He had a 14% scramble rate through his 6 NFL seasons. That was higher than any of the top rushing quarterbacks that we could think of dating back to 2017. We also know, again, how strongly rushing production, like you said, for quarterbacks correlates to fantasy production for quarterbacks. You have to look no further than last year's top 3 scorers at the position: Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, all also top 3 in rushing fantasy points per game. Daniels, he can absolutely put himself in that conversation. And to me, even at QB 11, where he's being drafted, like, he has the tools and the ability to kind of greatly outperform that ADP if he delivers, like we've been saying here, and that talent translates to the NFL as well, which I think it's a good chance of. And yeah, that I did my rankings back in June. I'm going to obviously do an update of those. He's going to be moving up for me as well.
Yeah, and I think like the big difference between him and Williams, like Williams could have a bad rookie season, and if he does that, then he's outside of the top 20 fantasy quarterbacks. Daniels could grade outside of the top, or have a passing grade below 60, and he could still be a top 10 fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited about the rookies this year. It's going to be a fun season. I can't wait. All right, how about a late round quarterback now that I'm not sure everyone is going to love or believe in, but I tend to think, at least, that he has the capability to outperform his current draft stock as QB 24 in Underdog ADP. It's Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans. Again, not everybody's going to be drafting Will Levis if you're in like a 10 or 12 team 1 QB league, right? But he's still worth talking about here. And maybe I'll start with this one, since there's a chance I might be a bigger believer in him. And Nate, we'll get your thoughts on how you feel about him in a sec as well. So for me, Levis, another one kind of like Anthony Richardson, who we didn't get a full season of as a rookie because he took over for Ryan Tannehill in week 8 after kind of riding the pine there for a bit as a second rounder. Obviously, that first game, things started hot for Levis, 4 touchdown passes, but that was very clearly like the peak of his rookie year, because he played 9 games. And those 4 passing touchdowns in week 8 accounted for 50% of all his passing touchdowns the rest of the year. So obviously not great. Now, for me, one of the key areas I think for improvement for Levis comes from an all new coaching staff coming in, including Brian Callahan as the head coach, to hopefully fix one of, I think, the most glaring issues from last season, in that Levis's play on the field relied so heavily on like low percentage throws. Like his 11.1 average depth of target led the NFL. And it just isn't typically a good recipe for efficiency or success for a rookie quarterback. It was also much higher than what Tannehill was doing when he was in there. He had an 8.4 average depth of target. Levis had 57 throws that were at least 20 plus yards downfield, which again, he only played half a season, and that amount of throws was tied with CJ Stroud, who played 6 more games than Levis and nearly twice as many dropbacks. So to me, it's kind of up to the coaching staff to settle that down a bit and create easier and more efficient passing from Levis here in year 2. And if they that's if they want to give him any shot at success, really. So the other part of that for me is that compiling a really nice receiving core with DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, that does make things a lot easier on him as well. I think like PFF.com has our team receiving core rankings on the site right now, and the Titans are ranked 12th best in there. For comparison, they were ranked 30th last year. So a huge improvement there. And that's, I think, so crucial for a quarterback like Will Levis, who doesn't have the rushing upside to rely on, where the large majority of his fantasy production is going to come from him being in the pocket and passing. So he needs to find success there. Hopefully, bringing in like an offensive minded coach like Callahan will be the biggest help, but yeah, it has to improve because his accuracy was crap last year. And that's kind of what's to be expected when you're, chucking it deep at such a high rate. It's crazy. When the play was to throw at least 10 yards downfield, his average depth of target was 23 yards on average, which was the second highest mark in the league. So it's no surprise when you look at his adjusted completion rate, he ranked 42nd among 45 qualifying quarterbacks. So again, having that strong receiving core that can get open in all areas of the field, relying on them and the coaching staff, I think could be huge for Levis's development. And it comes at the right time, early enough in his NFL career where he can be molded to get it right. And, then touchdowns and yardage, all that stuff will come with it too. But to me, it starts with kind of a focus on changing up that deep ball reliance style from last year.
Yeah, I agree with you with everything you said there. I think in single quarterback leagues, I'm still probably not drafting him just because if you draft one of the top 4 quarterbacks, then you probably don't need to draft a backup. So even in 12-team leagues, we're only drafting about 20 quarterbacks. So he might be right at that range. I did have him as probably my favorite sleeper quarterback, anyone getting drafted in the 11th round or later. So I'm excited about him for the reasons you said. I think the only thing I have to add to that is just switching the coaching staff as well. It's going from Mike Vrabel having Derrick Henry as that was the offense's philosophy, is run first, run with Henry over and over. And now they don't have Henry anymore, as well as a coach who was with the Bengals, and they were one of the more pass-heavy teams. So not only are we hoping for better efficiency in his passes with the new coaching staff and with all of the new receiving weapons they have, but I also think just the quantity of passes should also increase. So that's just great for everyone in the passing offense in Tennessee. Just the more dropbacks you have, the more attempts you have, the more yards you get, the more opportunities you have to score touchdowns. So I think that'll be good for everyone in the Titans passing offense as well. So I think he's probably the best option in that range of if you're looking for someone with high upside there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And like you said, yeah, 1 QB leagues, probably not drafting Will Levis. I know that's going to be most people's complaint about putting him on a list like this, but, not everybody's in a small, 1 QB league or anything like that, right? Super flex league, deeper leagues, those things all need to be accounted for here as well. So yeah, I'm with you. I like Levis. Again, probably a deeper candidate for this list specifically, but there's definitely a nice room for improvement there in 2024. So those are kind of our 4 breakout favorites. We wanted to get a nice 5 names in here to talk about. So while he's not technically on my breakout list, Nate, I'll be curious about how you feel about him heading into this season. Bryce Young of the Carolina Panthers is going to probably make some breakout lists just for being that 2023 first overall pick and knowing that odds are he could only improve from a poor rookie season. So I guess let's have a quick discussion about whether we do or don't expect him to kind of break out in 2024. How are you feeling about Bryce Young right now?
Yeah, like I think there's a chance. I think like this exercise is almost a process of elimination of the quarterback position because you have like Allen, Hurts, Mahomes, Jackson, the clear top four. You have Stroud, Love, and Purdy, all guys who played well last year in their first year as starters. Burrow, Prescott, Murray, not necessarily the youngest quarterbacks in the world, but they've at least played very well in at least one of the last 2 seasons. So those are like the clear 10 starters, along with some of the guys we were talking about. Goff, Tua, Baker, all top 10 last year. Geno, Justin Fields, Kirk Cousins, Lawrence, Daniel Jones, even all top 10 in 2022. Herbert, Stafford, Rodgers, top 10 in 2021, and Watson and Wilson, top 6 in 2020. And that covers almost all of the quarterbacks in the league who have been at least a clear fantasy starter in one of the last couple seasons. That just leaves, outside of those guys and the four guys we've talked about today, it leaves Bryce Young. It leaves the Patriots, Vikings, and Broncos, who all have a rookie quarterback fighting for a starting job. So we don't even know if they're going to be the starter for the whole season or how that'll all shake out. It leaves Derek Carr, who is consistently between quarterback 13 and quarterback 19 every single season. So I don't see many people going to call him a breakout. And then it leaves the Raiders, either Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell. So if we want a fifth guy, Young is pretty much the only guy that we can consider here. So I think like you can't even really look at his numbers last year and try to find some hope there. It's just knowing what we knew coming out of college. And now he has a new head coach, has Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette. So hopefully a better receiving group than what he had last year. So we just hope the changes are going to be enough for him to show that talent that led him to be the first overall pick in the draft a year ago. So I definitely think there is a chance that will happen. But again, this is like if you're in a super flex league and didn't draft a second quarterback early and are waiting on a second quarterback, then I would definitely try to get Young before I'd get probably some of the other rookie quarterbacks that we don't really know when they will win the starting job this year. And that could very well change over the course of the next month. We could find out a lot more of like, hey, this really seeing who's getting the reps with the first team in training camp now that training camp's really starting to ramp up over these next couple of days. So that could very well change. But until that does, I'm more confident of Young being the starter for the entire season than the other rookie quarterbacks that weren't drafted 1 or 2.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, it was hard. Like where I kind of landed with Young is that, you know, as much as I do expect improvement from last year, I just don't know if it'll be like enough of an improvement to qualify for that kind of true breakout season in terms of fantasy production. Like he's not really too dissimilar to Will Levis in that they were both kind of unproductive and inefficient rookies. But at least for me, like Levis showed a bit more fantasy wise than Young. And I'd say, you know, has the better receiving core to help him out as well. Not that Young's receiving core is bad, or at least as bad as it was last year. Like you said, they brought in Deontay Johnson, they drafted Xavier Legette. Offensive line is probably better in Carolina than it is in Tennessee as well. But I was kind of choosing between the two. I definitely prefer Levis. If you're comparing Levis and Bryce Young, Levis has the better receiving core. He was better in fantasy points per game, per dropback as well, was better in passing yards per game, passing grade, passer rating, and he was slightly better in pressure to sack conversion rate as well, which may alleviate some of that O-line concern as well there. So, yeah, the one thing I did find interesting with Bryce Young when looking at kind of like past breakout quarterbacks who had poor rookie seasons and what helped them in year 2 was that breakout quarterbacks from the past decade, 4 of them all got new head coaches, Daniel Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Jalen Hurts, Jared Goff, and all 4 of them were at the very least top 12 in pass rate for their rookie seasons. So they were passing a ton and putting a lot on the rookie quarterbacks themselves. But then when that new coach came in and into year 2, every one of them dropped in pass rate significantly. Like Jones went from 8th in pass rate to 18th. Lawrence went from 5th in pass rates to 16th. Hurts went from 3rd to 30th. And then Goff went from 12th to 29th. And when looking at Bryce Young, who also gets a new head coach, like him and the Panthers were 10th in pass rate last season. So maybe the new coaching staff like puts more of an emphasis on the run, taking some of the pressure off the plate of their young quarterback, like these other 4 teams did, that led to improved success. If there's something to that, I just found it, that really kind of interesting. And maybe there is a game plan around Young where they will take some off his plate, and that can help his kind of overall development and performance. Like, we'll see. But yeah, I didn't want to base his entire breakout potential on that. So for me, like, he just kind of missed the breakout cut this year, I guess, for my list.
Yeah, I would think those teams that start running more, it's also probably like the quarterback's playing better, therefore they're winning, therefore they can run the ball more, compared to a lot of those quarterbacks in their rookie years. We see this all the time where their team's not winning, so you have to throw the ball all the time in the fourth quarter to rack up those passing attempts, which is what we saw from Young last year.
Yeah, they can absolutely be tied together for sure. So that's pretty much going to do it for today. Quicker episode, like we said at the top, quarterback, smaller group to choose from, but hopefully you all found that helpful and enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching or listening. If you are watching on the YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe. We greatly appreciate that as well. Nate, thank you to you as well for breaking it all down with me. Please let everyone know what you got going on at pff.com this week.
Sure. So the last 3 weeks, I've wrapped up a couple of series. I've got sleepers for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends all up on the website. I have the perfect draft strategy for all 12-team leagues. I break it into 4 different groupings: picks 1 through 3, 4 through 6, 7 through 9, 10 through 12. I've been doing at least 3 player profiles a day. Some days it's ended up being more just because we've had a crazy schedule. So the editors have moved some stuff around, but I think I am up to at least 1 player profile for all 32 teams at this point, trying to at least spread it out. So if you're a fan of a particular team, you can at least have 1 player about them. So over 30 something player profiles on the site currently. That'll continue to be 3 per day, at least for another month, until either myself or the editors get sick and tired of them. But I am not tired of them yet, so they will keep going. But we'll continue to have at least an article a day outside of player profiles throughout the next week as well, and every single day from now until January, February.
Yeah, definitely check out Nate's work. He's got a ton of stuff up on the site right now that's going to be helpful for our fantasy leagues. And as for me, I've written up the breakout articles for every position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, as well as a defensive line, linebacker, and defensive back for my IDP DGens. So check those out on the site now. And Nate, you and Nick Bodiford are back next week. I'm on holiday, so I know we're still trying to figure out what we're going to cover for that episode, but I'm looking forward to listening to you guys, so people can check that out as well next week and look forward to it. But yeah, until then, peace out.